Okay, so in this video, we're going to go through some revision notes for Biology 0610, Cambridge IGCSE, for topic 11, the respiratory system in humans. So let's begin. Features of gas exchange and respiratory surfaces. So, features of gas exchange for respiratory surfaces, we need these features to allow maximum amount of gases to be exchanged in smallest amount of time. So these features are necessary for gas exchange to take place in small amount of time. We need to exchange as much as gas as possible in the smallest amount of time. Okay? So the features that help us do this is large surface area, thin walls, and good air ventilation. Large surface area is to allow faster diffusion of gases across the surface. Thin walls is to ensure diffusion distances remains short. Good air ventilation is to maintain high concentration gradient for faster diffusion. So both large surface area and good air ventilation maintain a high concentration gradient to allow faster diffusion. Thin walls decrease the distance, so the diffusion occurs faster. So the property of the surface, if it's thin, usually it's one cell thick, it provides short distance to diffuse. Again, large surface area, so many molecules can diffuse across at the same time. It's moist, so cells die if not keep moist. It's well ventilated, again to maintain high concentration gradient, and is close to a blood supply. This is deoxygenated and oxygenated transfer of blood. So deoxygenated blood, as you can see, is going inside. As it goes inside, it goes into the alveolus. Gas exchange takes place here. Oxygen comes in, CO2 goes out. Then the oxygen enters the deoxygenated blood and makes it oxygenated, and the oxygenated blood goes out from the other side. That was just the intro to the respiratory system. Now let's start to identify the organs of our respiratory system, and then we'll take each organ in detail. So the organs of our respiratory system, the first one is nasal cavity. This is the first organ of the respiratory system. Then is the trachea. Trachea is down here. The trachea then branches into the lungs. The lungs are covered by the pleural cavity, which is filled with fluid on the outside. The bronchus is inside, and the bronchus are covered with the intercostal muscles on the outside. Below the intercostal muscles, we have the ribs, and below the ribs, we have the diaphragm, a dome-shaped muscle to support the ribs and intercostal muscles during exhalation and inhalation. And the bronchus is divided into many branches called bronchioles, and each bronchiole contains an alveoli or alveolus, which is where gas exchange takes place. So what is the function of cartilage in trachea? Our trachea contains cartilage because the trachea is a tube that's surrounded by rings of cartilage on the outside. These rings of cartilage that surround the trachea support the airways and keep them open during breathing. So they support the airways, the tube, and it helps to keep the tube open. So during breathing, gas exchange can take place easily. If the cartilage was absent, the sides would collapse because there would be nothing to support it, and air pressure inside the tubes would drop. Respiratory organ summary intro. So let's take a quick definition for each organ. The structure and its description. Ribs. Ribs is a bony structure that protects internal organs as the lungs. Yes, because the ribs is the structure that is below the intercostal muscles surrounding the lungs, and it protects the internal organs in the lungs. Intercostal muscles are muscles between the ribs which control their movement, causing inhalation and exhalation. Diaphragm is a sheet of connective tissue and muscle at the bottom of the thorax that helps change the volume of the thorax to allow inhalation and exhalation. So it's a sheet of connective tissue and muscle at the bottom of the thorax. So your thorax is somewhere here, under the lungs. This is a sheet or dome-shaped muscle that helps change the volume of the thorax to allow inhalation and exhalation, to allow the volume to contract and expand. Trachea is a windpipe that connects the mouth and nose to the lungs. Trachea starts in the interconnection between your mouth and your nose. The trachea connects both mouth and the nose to the lungs. It's the interconnection in between. Larynx is also known as the voice box when air passes across to make sounds. So the voice box is actually located in the larynx, and when air passes in, the larynx helps the voice box to make sounds. Bronchi are large tubes branching off the trachea with one bronchus for each lungs. So after the trachea branches into bronchi. There's two bronchi. Each bronchi branches into bronchus, and each one contains alveoli for each lung. Bronchioles are the branches of bronchi to split into smaller tubes. They're connected in the lungs to the alveoli, and alveoli are tiny air spaces where gas exchange takes place. Oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide comes out. Intercostal muscles. So we have two sets of intercostal muscles, external intercostal muscles and internal extracostal muscles. External ones are the ones on the outside of the ribcage because they are external. They pull the ribcage up. Internal ones are on the inside of the ribcage and they pull the ribcage down. Muscles can only pull on bones, not push on them. So these muscles are only pushing on the bones. They're only pulling on the bones. They're not pushing them. Pulling up and pulling down. During inhalation, you're pulling them up, and during exhalation, you're pulling them down. This is a illustration of the lung, a detailed diagram of the lung. Here we have the ribs. This is the ribs. These are the intercostal muscles. The ribs are on the intercostal muscles. They pull them up and down. These are the branches of bronchioles. This is the bronchus. We have two bronchus. This is the right lung because it is on your left hand side, and this is the left lung because it's on your right hand side. These are rings of cartilage on the trachea to support the airways. This tube is the trachea. This is the larynx where the voice box is located. This is the clavicle, collarbone. These are the external intercostal muscles located on the outside. These are the internal intercostal muscles located on the inside. This is the sternum to connect both lungs and support the larger lung. This is a cavity fluid present in the smaller lung, and this is the dome-shaped muscle diaphragm. The diaphragm is a thin of sheet muscle that separates the chest cavity from the abdomen and is responsible for controlling ventilation in the lungs. So it's a sheet of muscle, or it's a dome-shaped muscle that separates the chest cavity from the abdomen and is responsible for controlling ventilation in our lungs. By controlling ventilation, we means it controls the volume during inhalation and exhalation of gas exchange. Volume and pressure changes in lungs. Inhalation and exhalation. During inhalation is breathing in. The external set of intercostal muscles, the intercostal muscles on the outside, they contract and they pull the ribs up and out. So during inhalation, external set of muscles have contracted, they pulled the ribs up and out. Then the diaphragm contracts and flattens to increase the volume of the chest cavity, the thorax. During inhalation, the intercostal muscles have contracted and the diaphragm has been pulled and contracted upwards to increase the volume of the chest cavity. This leads to a decrease in air pressure inside the lungs to draw air inside. So as you inhale, you feel there's a decrease in air pressure inside your lungs, or a short decrease of air inside your lungs because air is being drawn inside and intercostal muscles and diaphragms are contracting to increase the volume of the chest cavity. Exhalation, on the other hand, is quite the opposite. It's breathing out where the external set of intercostal muscles relax and they drop the ribs down. So as we exhale, we relax the intercostal muscles to drop the ribs down and inwards. Then the diaphragm relaxes and moves upwards to decrease the volume of chest cavity, the thorax. This increases the air pressure inside the lungs to force air outwards. So again, during exhalation, external set of muscles relaxed, they drop the diaphragm downwards, volume of chest cavity has decreased, and increase in air pressure inside the lungs. This is to force air outwards. Another type of exhalation is forced exhalation. This one is when the intercostal muscles are working to pull the ribs down in to decrease the thorax volume more, forcing out more air forcefully and quickly. So this is forced exhalation, where we force our intercostal muscles to force out the air forcefully and more quickly. This is usually done during vigorous exercise or activity because it allows more volume of gas to be exchanged. And during vigorous exercise, we need more gas exchange to take place because our body needs more oxygen, hence there's more exhalation and more carbon dioxide being excreted outwards. This is why during exercise we are performing forced exhalation, forcing our intercostal muscles to force out more air quickly and decrease the thorax volume more. A short fact, external and internal intercostal muscles work as antagonistic pairs. This means they work in different directions to each other. Inhalation and exhalation diagrams. So during inhalation, what's happening? Air is going inside the lungs, through the mouth, trachea, into the bronchi, and into the lungs. When this happens, pressure decreases because the air is drawn inside the lungs. The diaphragm is going to contract downward. It's going to contract, and external intercostal muscles also contract to expand the rib cage. So as you inhale, the rib cage is expanding and external intercostal muscles are contracting. Expansion, contraction inside. So breathing in, external intercostal muscles contract, rib cage moves up and out, diaphragm contracts and flattens, the volume of thorax is increased, pressure inside the thorax decreases, and air is drawn inwards. Like I said, exhalation is the opposite of this. Air is drawn outward. Since air is drawn outward, the pressure inside the lungs is going to increase, external intercostal muscles relax, and the rib cage drops. Rib cage is dropping downwards, and external intercostal muscles are relaxing. Diaphragm relaxes and moves upward. As you can see, the diaphragm is moving upward as I exhale. Breathing out, external intercostal muscles relax. The rib cage moves down and in. The diaphragm relaxes and becomes dome-shaped. Moving inward, volume of thorax decreases. Pressure inside the thorax is going to increase and air is forced outward. Exactly the opposite of inhalation. So with that, we are done with the intro to the respiratory system, the main organs of the respiratory system, and all about inhalation and exhalation. Now, inhalation and exhalation can also be said as inspired and expired air. Inspired air is more like inhalation, and expired air is more like the air in exhalation. So atmospheric air in general has 20 to 21% oxygen, but we absorb 4 to 5%, hence breathing out expired air has 16% oxygen. So in the atmosphere we have about 20 to 21%. We as humans are absorbing 4 to 5%. This means we leave 16% oxygen in our expired air. Carbon dioxide in the air is approximately 0.04%. As carbon dioxide diffuses into our alveoli from the blood, we breathe out 4% carbon dioxide. So this is the amount of carbon dioxide that has taken gas exchange place in our alveoli. From 0.04 to 4%. The expired air we breathe out has more water vapor than the inspired air we breathe in. The temperature of exhaled air is always higher than inhaled air. Gas exchange takes place in the alveoli, we already know that. So these are the four different gases, and they're inspired and expired air, and the reason for such a difference. So oxygen, we inspire 21%, as this is the atmospheric air, and we expire 16%. The reason for this is because the oxygen is removed from our blood by respirating cells, because the blood returning to the lungs has lower oxygen. Carbon dioxide, 0.04, is an inspired, expired is 4%, because carbon dioxide is produced by respiration and it diffuses into the blood from respiring cells. Blood transports the carbon dioxide to the lungs where it diffuses into the alveoli. Water vapor is lower in inspired air and higher in expired air. Water evaporates from the moist lining of the alveoli into expired air. So we have water on the lining of our alveoli, and as gas exchange is taking place, the air that's going outside of the alveoli, the water on the lining of the alveoli also goes with that. This is why the expired air contains more water vapor. Nitrogen is balanced, isotonic, 78%, 78%, because it's a very stable gas and it is not used by the body. So even if we inhale nitrogen, we're not going to need it, because nitrogen is needed as a molecule for our body to make amino acids and amino acid chains for proteins and digestion, but nitrogen gas is not needed by our body, so it remains isotonic. As we inhale 78% nitrogen, we also exhale 78% nitrogen, and it does not change in inspired or expired air. The lime water test. This is an experiment for this chapter on inspired and expired air. So, in this experiment, we have two boiling tubes, boiling tube A and boiling tube B. In both boiling tubes, we place lime water in between, and both boiling tubes are connected to your mouth by rubber tubings. As we breathe in, air is going to be drawn into boiling tube A. As we breathe out, air is going to be drawn into boiling tube B. When the carbon dioxide bubbles through, boiling tube A will remain clear, so nothing's going to happen. But lime water B is going to become milky and cloudy. So again, we're going to exhale carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is going to bubble through both tubes. A will remain clear, B will become milky and cloudy. This shows that the percentage of carbon dioxide in exhaled air is higher than inhaled air, because as we excrete carbon dioxide outward, as we exhale carbon dioxide outward, we see that test tube A remains clear. But the effect is in test tube B, because the blown out air is in test tube B. This means carbon dioxide has a higher percentage in test tube B. So exhaled test tube B has a higher percentage of carbon dioxide than the inhaled carbon dioxide in test tube A. That was the experiment, a very simple one. Now let's look at protecting the breathing system. First of all is mucus. Mucus is a substance that traps particles like pathogens and dust, preventing them from entering and damaging the lungs. So it's a substance that traps particles usually found in above the lungs, in the larynx, or in our nose, to protect the lining of the nose connected with the hair, to prevent bacteria, pathogens, and dust by entering. This mucus is made by gallbladder cells, a special mucus producing cells usually present over here, and they're shaped like a gallbladder cup. That's why they're called gallbladder cells. Next one is cilia. Cilia are tiny hairs on the ends of ciliated epithelial cells lining the lungs. So our lungs are lined by cells called ciliated epithelial cells. These cells have cilia, tiny hairs lining them. This cilia, tiny hairs, beat up and push mucus up the nose to be expelled. This is the ciliated epithelial cell that lines the lungs, and this is the cilia, tiny hair-like membranes, to push mucus out of the throat and lungs. The next experiment for this chapter, this one is a bit more complex, investigating effects of physical activity on breathing. How? By counting the breaths taken at 1 minute on rest and measuring the average chest expansion using a tape measure around the chest. So here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to count the number of breaths taken at 1 minute at rest and measuring average chest expansion using tape measure around the chest. So to do this, we exercise for a set period of time. So we do some vigorous activity and we exercise for some time to get our heart rate and breathing rate increased, approximately for 3 minutes. Immediately after you have finished the exercise for a set period of time, you count the number of breaths taken in 1 minute and measure the average chest expansion. How much has the chest expanded over 5 breaths? Following this exercise, the number of breaths per minute and chest expansion will have increased, and this is how you investigate the effect of physical activity on breathing. Now let's link this physical activity to the breathing. During this, what's going to happen is that your frequency and your depth of breathing will increase because as you're exercising, your muscles are working harder and they are respiring aerobically more. Since there's more aerobic respiration, for sure the breathing rate and depth and frequency of your breathing is going to increase. This will cause your muscles to require and ask for more oxygen to be delivered and carbon dioxide to be removed. Since your muscles are respiring aerobically more because your breathing rate is increasing and you're working more, your muscles will start to demand more oxygen. I need more oxygen. And they're going to say that we need to expel carbon dioxide because we need oxygen. They'll keep demanding this, and to get this oxygen, they need energy. So the overall demand is going to be an energy demand. Energy demand for more oxygen and expelling of carbon dioxide. If the energy demand is not met, they will respire anaerobically producing lactic acid. And this is what mostly happens. Usually, our muscles need so much oxygen and need carbon dioxide to be expelled really fast, and they're not able to keep up with the energy demand. Because our muscles are not able to keep up with the energy demand, they begin to respire anaerobically and produce lactic acid. This lactic acid then starts to build up in your muscles after exercise, and it needs to be removed. So it starts, your muscles start to produce lactic acid as you're exercising. Once you finish exercising and take some rest, all the lactic acids then start to store up in your muscles. This needs to be removed because it lowers the pH of the cells and it denatures enzymes to catalyze other reactions. If it lowers the pH of the cells will move, the pH of the cell and enzyme is going to move far away from optimum pH and they will also begin to denature. If the enzymes denature, they will start to catalyze other reactions. So how do we remove this lactic acid and prevent lowering the pH and denaturing the enzymes? We do this by repaying oxygen depth. By repaying oxygen depth means we combine it with oxygen. How do we test repaying oxygen depth? We test it by measuring the time for breathing rate to be normal after exercise. So the time it's taken, or the time your breathing rate takes to become normal after you have finished exercise, is a measure of how much time it took to repay your oxygen depth, meaning to combine it with oxygen. The lactic acid to be combined with oxygen. If it took a longer time, this means more lactic acid was produced and greater oxygen depth is to be repaid. If it took a shorter time, less lactic acid is produced and there is less oxygen depth to be repaid. How does the breathing rate increase during exercise? So first, the rate of aerobic respiration is increasing when exercising because CO2 is a product of aerobic respiration. During exercise, we need oxygen and we excrete a lot of carbon dioxide. This is aerobic respiration. Carbon dioxide is being released. Hence, carbon dioxide levels in the muscle cells is going to increase. Carbon dioxide diffuses out of the blood plasma, and carbon dioxide will cause a drop in pH and making the blood acidic. This is where chemoreceptors come in. Chemoreceptors are cells in the medulla oblongata of the brain. They detect changes in the bodies as pH or blood gas levels. Now, when the blood flows into the brain with all this high carbon dioxide concentration, because again, muscles release carbon dioxide in aerobic respiration, causes carbon dioxide to increase in the blood and reduce the pH. This blood is now going to go to the brain, and chemoreceptors are going to detect high levels of carbon dioxide in the blood. Now, the reaction chemoreceptors are going to do, when they detect this high level, they're going to send nerve impulses to the diaphragm and intercostal muscles to increase the rate and depth of muscle contraction and volume of air in and out. This will result in greater oxygen absorption and carbon dioxide removal. Let's review this one more time. Our breathing. How does it increase during exercise? During exercise, we are respiring aerobically. By aerobic respiration, we are taking in oxygen and expelling out carbon dioxide. Because we're expelling out so much carbon dioxide will increase in our muscle cells, in the blood plasma, and it will reduce pH of the blood and become acidic. As this is going to happen, this blood with high concentration of CO2 is going to flow into the brain. In the brain, we have chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors is a receptor that detects changes in pH and blood gas levels. So the chemoreceptors are going to detect the blood and see there's a very high concentration of carbon dioxide. As they detect this, it's going to send nerve impulses as a reaction or as a response to having such high carbon dioxide during exercise. Is going to send a response to our diaphragm and intercostal muscles to increase the breathing rate so we can absorb more carbon dioxide to absorb more oxygen to make up for all the carbon dioxide removed. In the end, this will just result in more oxygen absorbed and more carbon dioxide removal, and this increases our overall breathing rate.